Good evening and welcome to Late Night with Lenette. I'm Lenette Peterson, your host, and this week we have a very interesting guest, but we are going to start with our Maggie Moment. Shame on our governor. She is slashing millions of dollars out of the nursing home budget to cover her mismanagement of funds. She has made a mockery of our budget, and now it is outrageous and shocking. She's taking millions out of the nursing home, dumping her mistake on the nursing home. This is utterly disgusting and shameful. Governor, not nice. Hello, Christine.
Hello.
My guest this week is Christine Peters, former resident of Merrimack. You were raised here, weren't you?
Yes, I went to Merrimack High School and graduated in 1994.
There you go. Now she lives in Amherst with her husband David and their 4 children and all their farm animals, chickens, turkey, sheep, lambs. Did I miss anything?
Rabbits.
Rabbits, yes, can't forget the rabbits. We have a state of the house moment to speak of as well. Our New Hampshire house, I don't know about you guys, marriage license fees are going to go up $5 unless our state Senate has more common sense than our House of Representatives. The representatives want to raise it $5 to cover domestic abuse. Now, when I was in the House for 2 terms, Republicans had a pledge they took. No new taxes or fees, and you didn't raise taxes or fees. Folks, what's going on here? This is $5 more for a marriage license. Of our 8 Merrimack state reps, all of who are Republican, only 3 voted against this. Folks, this is wrong. You're Republicans. Vote like it. We don't need to be adding more to our marriage license fee to cover domestic violence. If you don't raid money from Peter to pay Paul, there's funds where it's necessary. We don't need to take it from our constituents' pockets. So, Christine, how are you?
I'm doing great.
We are going to be discussing the lighter side of politics. And anytime you're involved, I'm sure there's some humor in there. Now, what got you started in politics?
It's actually funny. I was thinking on the way over here of my lighter side moments, and I realized that the reason I started having an interest in politics anyway is in college. When I was in school, it was during Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky time. And so there was a group of us. We used to get together at the coffee shop just in the night and watch the C-SPAN coverage or I guess CNN, MSNBC. We would watch them all and we would talk about what was going on and we could just have so much fun, although it was a sad time, I think, for our country politically, but we just got so much fun out of the coverage of it. And so we went from there to form a college Republicans group. And then I sort of got out of politics when I graduated because I got married and had babies, and then I found myself home with a lot of time on my hands and a baby that slept 16 hours a day. And that's when I started with the Nashua Republican Women, and we started out sort of trying to revamp this group that had been vibrant and doing a lot of great work with women in politics and just had fallen off to a handful of people. And the way that I chose to go about that is to have a lot of fun. So we did kind of start out having some dinner meetings and doing some different fun activities. And then once you have the people there, then you can get the serious work done.
Now you're talking about the Nashua Area Federated Republican Women, aren't you?
I am.
There you go. Last week I had former President Janine Nodder and Maureen Mooney on the show. And
Okay.
I'm the current president of the Nashua area. You're a former president of the Nashua area, as well as former New Hampshire Federation president. Yes. And right now, what is I think you're secretary?
I'm secretary of the New Hampshire Federation.
Correct. Now, you're also going to the Sauhegan Valley Federated Republican Women. Do you hold a spot in there?
I was their president. I thought, well, maybe next I'll move somewhere else and be their president. But no, they just needed a little help. Same thing. They had been a huge club of 80 people, and they were down to that handful again. So we actually used the same strategy to start getting people coming again by having some more social things, but then began to get into the meatier side of politics.
Gotcha. Now, you were also very active with a Merrimack State Reps campaign. a few terms ago.
Yeah, my mom ran in, 2004. So we started, that was kind of our first taste of working on campaigns nonstop and learning tubing and the sort of door-to-door politics of New Hampshire. And even my children were teeny tiny things handing out literature. So,
now your mom, who's the Honorable Nancy Elliott, former Merrimack state rep, she served for 3 terms, correct?
That's a great question. I thought it was 4, but it might only be 3.
I believe it was 3 terms,
Well,
and then
yeah, you're right, because it was 2010 you came in.
Correct. I followed in her footsteps, and she couldn't take.
Because the thing was that we couldn't let her out of the house until we found someone to replace her, and then we strong-armed you that one day at Kohl's,
Yeah, I remember
where
that.
I started out. I was totally joking. I'm like, why don't you run? And then as I was saying it, I thought, no, why don't you run?
Yeah, and I remember my oldest daughter Sheila was there, and Sheila the whole ride home is, Mom, you got to run. Mom, that's good. Mom, you can't. Come on, Mom, you got to. And so ran it by my husband. We prayed about it, talked about it, and I did the 2 terms. So yeah, you got me going. Now, of all aspects of campaigning, what is your least favorite?
Telephone calls.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. Now, what don't you like about telephone calls?
People hate you.
They do.
I just really don't like it when people hate me. I'm terrible for politics, really. And you call them and they just hang up on you. Although I'll say this. You have one resident in Merrimack who I think, of all the people I've ever done phone calling with, she is the most fun and has the greatest conversation with people, and that is Jen Twardowski. I love doing a phone bank with her. Of course, it's been years since I have, but other than that, I've never enjoyed phone banking.
Yeah, with my first campaign, we were doing phone banking, and I had 5 teenagers as my campaign staff. And fortunately, it was one evening, just probably around 6 o'clock. Fortunately, I made the worst phone call. This gentleman asked for my name 3 times. I repeated it each time, and then he finally told me he was making sure he had the name right for the person not to vote for interrupting his dinner. And then he screamed and swore at me probably for the next 5 minutes.
Wow.
And when I stayed on the phone, and when he finally finished, I apologized for interrupting his dinner. And then he said, well, I'm surprised you had the guts to stay on the phone. And he hung up on me. So at that point, my teens and I said, okay, folks, we're done. From now on, we'll go out at lunchtime. And during the day, if you make the phone calls, most people home are senior citizens or moms, and they took the phone call. If they didn't want to talk to you, they just didn't answer, or they politely hung up. Getting answering machines was nice. You could just get my name out there, and we were good to go.
Right.
But yeah, phone calls, those are painful. What was your most fun part of campaigning?
Really? It's the parties.
Well, that's not really campaigning. That's the after.
Sure it is. We had the little coffee greeting time. We had some breakfast. So, we had breakfast with Mike Huckabee over at the Crown Plaza. And we had, just trying to think of some of the things we've done in Nashua, Merrimack area. We had a house party at my mom's for Newt Gingrich. Some of that is still the campaign. It's bringing the community to connect with the candidate. But you mean as far as the actual campaign work?
Correct.
Probably the tubing. Because you're trapped in the car with somebody for 6 or 8 hours in a day. And we used to have the kids buckled in the back seat. And if they were really good, they would get Taco Bell for lunch. So we'd do it till lunchtime, get Taco Bell, stretch everybody, and go to the bathroom, and then get back on the road. And actually, it's funny. My daughter Chloe is in a group for kids with special medical conditions. And so someone gave a grant so that they could go snow tubing up at McIntyre. And so I thought my kids would be so excited to go do this. So I said, guys, guess what? We're going to go tubing. And this was in February, and they groaned, please, no tubing.
Now, you said not lip dropping. Now, some people refer to tubing as a lip drop. We discussed this last week on my show, where you just drive around, and when you see a newspaper tube, you put your literature in the newspaper tube. Thus the name tubing. That was always my favorite, was tubing. My first campaign, I did a lot of tubing with my teenagers. Rebecca was going into her senior year, and they all have community service hours. So Rebecca went tubing with me. David Combs and I spent a whole day tubing.
Wow.
All I had to do was buy food. With David, we went to D'Angelo's. I bought him lunch. Then we bought him snacks later on, and we spent the whole day tubing. Plug in my iPod to my radio, and we just listened to old 80s music the whole time. But yeah, tubing was the most fun.
You know, I'm thinking that I spent a day tubing with you.
Yes, you did.
But I don't recall getting any lunch.
But your children got munchkins.
I was thinking that there were donuts involved.
Yes, your children got munchkins. And then your daughter, was it Maddie that came with me one day tubing last year for my town council. Okay. She spent a day tubing with me. And awesome. She got food. Your kids were cuter. They got the donuts.
Our kids are definitely politically savvy, far more than we were as kids. So they were actively involved in Linda Garcia's campaign. They did a lot of putting out signs all over. If you live in the area, you'll be familiar with the work my children did with Linda Garcia's signs.
They were everywhere. Well, my mother, way back in the dark ages when I was a kid, she got all of us involved in phone calling way back then. I mean, that's basically all they did. I mean, you didn't have the computers or anything like that. She'd give us a list, and we'd sit at the rotary phone, and usually we were calling for a candidate running for mayor of Beverly, Massachusetts.
Wow.
I remember back then we were always calling for Mayor Grimes. My mother was a Republican, so he was most likely the Republican candidate for mayor in town.
How do you do?
They used to flip-flop. One term it would be Mayor Vitale, then it would be Mayor Grimes. So they were always seemed to be battling it out.
All right.
But yeah, phone calls. And my daughters started with phone calls at Frank Edelblu's office.
Okay.
They've been there making phone calls for different presidential candidates over the years. Yeah, you've got to start them young in the campaigning.
I'd say my Maddie still prefers the parties.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, my teens, as long as it was food, teens will make a lot of phone calls over a pizza. I'd buy a couple pizzas, and we'd go to the phone bank, and they'd make probably 2-3 hours worth of phone calls.
Right.
Pizza and soda.
This was the first cycle that our kids were old enough to do phone banking, and so they would go up to Concord and do phone banking for Linda Garcia. And actually, somehow I ended up making enough American chop suey or baked ziti casserole for about 30 homeschool students that came in from other parts of the country and helped work on phone banking in the last week.
Wow, very good.
So,
now, any interesting moments or something that happened while you were campaigning or tubing?
Well, not so much an interesting moment, but I did totally destroy one minivan learning to tube. I hit so many mailboxes the first year that my husband said, let's just keep that van for tubing. I learned the value of fold-away mirrors.
My truck has a nice fold-in mirror. Janine Otter and I did a lot. We lit dropped the whole town of Merrimack. We were talking last week, probably at least 4 times in my 2 campaigns. And we were freshmen the same term. And my truck mirror folds in. I did the drive-in, she did the stuffing. And we had fun. Rebecca and I, our favorite was critiquing mailboxes.
Oh, right. There are some good ones in Merrimack.
Yes, and a lot of them look like caskets.
We like the shotgun shell.
Yes. There's some shotgun shells, some big fish. A couple of my colleagues enjoyed the fact that my house was one of the houses with the interesting mailboxes. Janine Nodder and former state rep Joe Thomas were out doing a lit drop. And about a week later, Janine and I were coming to my house during a lit drop, and she just busted out laughing and quickly called Joe. I had the house with the big fish.
Oh.
A Christmas present to Eric from his sister. And we still have the big fish mailbox.
Yeah, we had some friends with a Michigan helmet. They were in Amherst, though. And I would always forget which house was theirs. It was one of those neighborhoods where everything looks the same.
Yep.
And you see that big blue and yellow helmet.
There you go. Yep. Any disasters other than destroying your minivan with tubing?
Disasters.
Yeah. I remember once with your mother, I was tubing with her, and we took out a mailbox.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Then you have to go to the door and...
No, we get propped it back up. It was very loose anyway. It was extremely loose, and something hit it and it fell over, and we stuck it back in the ground and got it to standing the way it was before. And obviously someone else had done that. But yeah, that was we got out of there in a hurry.
Yeah, it's funny. I think when I think about my politics, the things that are most memorable for me are the relational experiences. So we spent one week of campaigning. I don't remember if it was a primary or after primary, but we threw Jeb Bradley's literature into in with Mom and a bunch of other people who were running. So it must have been post primary, and so my kids kept talking about, I need another little Bush, I need another, or a little Bradley, another little Jeb, another little Jeb. And so they've always called him Jeb Bradley. And when our daughter was very sick, then Jeb Bradley and who's the other guy that his good friend? I can't remember, but they had their staff go out and buy a whole bunch of fun stuff for her to do. And I thought that was so sweet, because you wouldn't think, just because you're out there doing this, that you would meet these people and have that relationship. And then some of the other fun things I've gotten to do, I got to go to a private coffee with Cindy McCain. I mean, whatever your politics might be, that's still kind of fun. And
exactly.
So some of the relationship things, I would say the best relationship thing that ever came out of any politics I ever did was when we were in Kansas City for the National Federation of Republican Women. We got to have breakfast with Karen Santorum. Just a handful of us got together and met with her and just talked with her, and she shared a little bit about Bella. And so it's funny because that story kind of stayed with me. And then back 2 years ago now, in 2013, our good friends, the Steckies, baby was diagnosed with that same genetic disorder and sadly didn't live. But during that time when Rachel was pregnant, because of those contacts, we were able to put them in touch with Karen Santorum, and they were able to have some discussion about what this genetic disorder means for their child, and just to be able to have someone else who knows what that's all about. So I think that is the highlight of my political career.
Well, that is so cool. And the Santorums are such nice, down-to-earth people.
They really are.
When he was running for president, I endorsed him early on, and Rebecca had an intern position with him for the summer, and that was really cool.
Yeah.
She really enjoyed that, learned a lot. He was very personable and would talk. Didn't look at her just as an intern.
Right.
Would talk with her. And there was another boy in her class, Sean Fesco. I don't know if you know Sean.
Yep.
Yep. Well, he was an intern also. With Rick Santorum. And that looks good on your resume. Also, but for the kids, it looks good for them that they were an intern for presidential candidate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I got to the point, Mike Biondo and Nick Pappas were always calling me, letting me know what Rick's schedule was, and to make sure there was an audience there.
Right.
So I would show up at different house meetings wherever, all over New Hampshire, or if he was going to a factory in Milford, or I would show up. And it's one time Rick was talking in a house way out in we were in Henniker, and all of a sudden he looks and our eyes meet up, and he looks and he. Lenette Peterson, I see you everywhere, don't I? And it just totally threw him off. So that was kind of a funny moment. We just started laughing. But it's really neat in New Hampshire, meeting all these different candidates so often. I mean, after all, they get to know you. My first term, that same presidential primary, I was down in Washington, D.C. at a Vesta Roy, their D.C. trip in April. I'm down there, and my friends from New Hampshire and I are leaving a hotel where the conference was. As we were going out, Michelle Bachmann was coming in.
Okay.
Well, she put her hand on my shoulder and didn't remember my name, but she said, New Hampshire, what are you doing here? So my friends were like, oh my word, Michelle Bachmann knows who you are. And so I said, well, yeah. And she goes, and Michelle, said, oh, we're tight. She goes, and she took my camera and had her assistant get a picture of my group with her.
Nice.
So that was pretty cool.
That is cool.
Only in New Hampshire.
It's true. The opportunities in New Hampshire are so amazing. I used to think, it's so hard to be important, but New Hampshire is the one place where everyone's important. And be careful, because the person who looks the least important in the room is probably the most important.
Exactly.
You can't judge. In New Hampshire, we don't dress it up. They might be wearing their jeans and a sweatshirt, and that might be the Senate president, or you just don't know. Yeah. So that's one of the things I think that's done me well is that you have to always be nice to everybody. And if you're just always nice to everybody, you never have those embarrassing, oh, I was rude to so-and-so or...
Yeah. I remember one of the first house meetings I went to was for Mike Huckabee. Your mom had called me and told me he was going to be in Amherst and that I needed to go. So Eric and I hopped in the minivan and drove over to Amherst. And the house that he was meeting in is right in the village, Amherst Village. And the first bank vault is in the house.
Right.
And so it was really cool.
I was at that party.
It was really cool getting a tour of that house and seeing the bank vault. Well, I'm standing next to Mike Huckabee, and there was a lady on the other side of him, and she was asking these really strange questions, and he was doing his best to answer them. You could tell that thought it was very painful. I forget the questions, but they were bizarre. And he stood and he had his hands on his hips at one point like this. Well, the picture was taken, and I didn't know the picture had been taken. Well, it was put on his national newsletter. Your mom sent me a copy. I was in this newsletter, this picture, and it looked like he had his arm around me, the way his hands were. So I quickly emailed that to everyone on my list throughout the country, telling them they needed to vote for my friend Mike. Because it looked like he had his arm right around my waist. And I was getting emails from everybody.
Oh,
and
wow.
they were sending it to other people. They said, how do you know Mike? When did you meet Mike? This is so cool. And we looked tight.
It's funny, too. I think I'm also really cheeky. You might not know that. And I think it's so fun to just go and have your picture taken with some random person.
Oh, you have to.
So a few months ago, it wasn't even political. There was a radio contest on WGIR, and I called in and won tickets. And I've never won tickets to anything, and I didn't even know what I won tickets to. It was just some awards thing at the center of New Hampshire, and I didn't even know Donald Trump was going to be the speaker. I just really had no idea. And so when he came in, and by that time I knew he was in the building, but when he came in, I was like, there's nobody around. So I just walked over and got my picture with him, and I thought, oh, that's kind of fun.
There you go. Yeah, you have to. I was down at an ALEC convention in D.C., and Representative John Burt and I were walking around. Well, who do we see in the downstairs lobby area? It was Newt Gingrich. So we went walking, and I said, come on, we're getting our picture taken. And John was kind of, well, I don't know. Come on. We went right over and had our picture taken. And on a trip to Azerbaijan and Turkey 2 years ago, Representative Al Baldessaro and I were sitting at the same table. Well, the assistant prime minister was speaking. And I said, Al, we need our picture taken. He's like, what are we going to do? I said, just follow me. Pretend you know what you're doing. We walked right up the stairs on the podium at the end of the dinner. And all these people were going up. We didn't know who they were. We went up there. I said, just pretend you know what you're doing. So we walked right up. Al stands there and introduces himself as a representative, talks about being a former Marine. They're shaking hands. I'm getting all these pictures. And then I hand Al my camera, ask if I can have my picture taken. He's, sure. Wondering, who are you? And I introduced myself, had our picture taken. So when we were finished, I brought my camera over to our two Turkish guides, showed them the picture, and their jaws hit the floor. How did you get that picture? We just went up and pretended we knew what we were doing. They were shocked. And they said that he is the coolest man in all of Turkey. They were very jealous.
I think that's one of the things I've learned in all this is that these are just people. Yeah. They put their pants on one leg at a time. And if you just act like you're supposed to be there, everyone assumes you should be.
Exactly. I mean, some people put them on a pedestal and they go, oh, no, you can't talk to them. I see that up at the State House all the time when I was up there. You know, people would come in and speak in committee. I was on the House Judiciary, and some of the state reps would put our judicial people on this pedestal. Like I remember Judge Tina Nadeau was in our committee room all the time. And one state rep in particular, oh, I need to go talk to my judge. And one day we were having a very long day in judiciary. Representative Rowe was giving us like 15 minutes for lunch. I grabbed my lunch bag and was trying to scoot out of the room as fast as possible. Well, I went behind her in the wall, and I didn't push her. I just put my hand on her back to let her know I'm behind you and sneaking by. Well, this representative had a fit that I touched a judge. You touched my judge. You pushed my judge. And I looked at her and I said, wait a minute. She puts her pants on one leg at a time just like I do. And fortunately, Judge Nadeau looked at me and she goes, you know, you're right, Representative. I do. And I shouldn't be on a pedestal looking at the other state rep. You know, I wanted my lunch.
Right.
My lunch at the time was more important. Yeah. And you see that too often. Get rid of the pedestals. If there's a politician, especially now with the primary season coming up, if there's a politician you want to meet, call one of the campaigns, talk to them, schedule a house meeting, invite a few friends. The candidate will come right to your house. A handful of people. That's all it takes.
It's true.
And there's nowhere else other than New Hampshire where this will happen.
It's true.
Yeah. It's so cool. Yeah, and I always make sure I have my picture taken with as many as possible, posted on Facebook.
In case one of them gets to be president?
Well, and also just to spin up the liberals, if there are any liberals left on my Facebook page. And other people are envious. Friends from all over the country like, oh, how did you meet them? Where did you see them?
Yeah.
It's so cool.
It is.
Only in New Hampshire.
Oh, I have one other funny one, if you have a second. When I was good friends with Michelle Bryan, I don't know if you remember, her husband was working for the Secret Service here at the time. Yep. And we went to a lilac luncheon or something, and it was 4 generations of our family for some ridiculous reason. So it was one of my babies and me and my mom and my grandmother. And some lady started yelling that someone needs to know about this. There are 4 generations of people here. And I think maybe it was the vice president's wife at the time, so Cheney's wife.
Okay.
And so she's attacking this Secret Serviceman, and of course I knew he was a Secret Serviceman. I'm like, ma'am, he can't help you with what you're trying to do.
Too funny. Yeah, you never know who you're going to meet, who you're going to run into. But
Barbara Bush called me a monkey.
Very nice. Yeah, my kids shook hands with President Bush. That was awesome. Got a picture of them with Sheila and President Bush.
We were at McIntyre Ski Area, crazy big pregnant, and we had just sat underneath a semi-truck to get out of the sun. It was so crazy hot. So they had put the barrier there in case we want to come and attack the president or something. And Barbara Bush comes out and she says, "You all look like a bunch of monkeys down there."
Yeah, very good. Well, we are coming to a close of my show.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and stay tuned for the next showing of Late Night with Lenette. Don't forget, Merrimack, we have our town elections coming up. Start looking at who's running for town council. Our elections are April 14th. Make sure you look for the name Lenette Peterson. I would really appreciate your vote on the 14th. Remember, Late Night with Lenette, we'll be having our next show in a week. We try to bring out the lighter side of politics. We'll always have a Maggie Moment slamming our governor unless she shapes up, and the state of the House. If you're a Republican, vote Republican, or you will be fodder on my show. Good night, and God bless.